There are moments in a person's life that split everything in two. Before and after. The version of you that existed in the morning, and the version that emerged by nightfall, barely recognizable, standing in the ruins of everything you thought was real. This is one of those stories. And before you decide whether you have time to watch this, I want you to understand something. The woman at the center of this story did not see it coming. She was not naive. She was not careless. She was not the kind of woman people take advantage of, or so she thought. She was loved. She was trusted. She was surrounded by people she had given decades of her life to. And every single one of them was lying to her face. Before we go any further, we want to hear from you. Go ahead and drop in the comments where you are watching from right now. We would love to know. And if you are not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We release stories like this one regularly, and you do not want to be the last one to find out. Now, let us talk about Diana. Diana was the kind of woman who made a room feel warmer just by walking into it. She was 52 years old, lived in a well-kept, two-story home in a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where people wave from their driveways and kids still ride bikes until the streetlights come on. She had warm eyes, a wide laugh, and a reputation among her friends and family as the person you called when things went wrong, because Diana always knew what to say. She had been married to her husband, Marcus, for 23 years. 23 years of birthday dinners, holiday traditions, mortgage payments, arguments about the thermostat, and quiet Sunday mornings over coffee. 23 years of building a life together, brick by brick, until it felt as solid and permanent as the walls around them. And for the most part, Diana believed it was. Marcus was 55. A project manager for a mid-sized construction firm, he was the kind of man other men respected, not flashy, not loud, but dependable. He coached youth basketball for 11 straight years at their local rec center. He remembered everyone's name. He fixed his neighbor's gutters without being asked. He showed up. That was always the thing people said about Marcus. He showed up. At school events, at funerals, at hospital waiting rooms when someone needed a familiar face. He was the dependable one. The steady one. The man Diana had chosen above all others because she knew, in the marrow of her bones, that Marcus was not the kind of man who would ever do something like this. And then there was Rachel. Rachel and Diana had been best friends since the 8th grade. That was nearly 40 years of friendship, 4 decades of shared secrets, inside jokes, late-night phone calls, and the kind of unspoken understanding that only comes from knowing someone through every version of themselves. They had been there for each other through college applications and heartbreaks, through the death of Diana's mother, through Rachel's divorce in 2009, through job losses and cross-country moves and the slow, beautiful, complicated business of becoming middle-aged women who still made each other laugh until their eyes watered. Rachel was the maid of honor at Diana and Marcus's wedding. She was the first person Diana called when she found out she was pregnant with their daughter. She was, by every measure, family. Not by blood, but by choice, which Diana had always believed was a far stronger bond. She was wrong. To understand how a story like this begins, you have to go back further than the moment it was discovered. Because the truth is, by the time Diana found out, the betrayal had already been going on for far longer than anyone wanted to admit. According to researchers and relationship experts who have studied cases of double betrayal, which is what therapists call it when a spouse cheats with a close friend, these situations almost never happen overnight. They build. They creep. They are constructed slowly, over shared moments and manufactured excuses, hidden in plain sight, disguised as ordinary life. A 2017 study on infidelity patterns found that over 53% of people who admitted to cheating in a marriage did so with someone they already knew personally, a close friend, a coworker, a neighbor. And in cases where the affair partner was the spouse's friend as well, the deception tended to run deeper and last longer, precisely because both people involved had a built-in cover story. They were allowed to be close. Nobody questioned it. Nobody thought to. That is exactly what happened here. It started, as best Diana could later piece together, sometime in the spring of 2021. The world was still recovering from the pandemic. People were working from home, Boundaries between personal and professional life had dissolved, and the usual structures that kept certain things in check had loosened considerably. Marcus had been working remotely for over a year by that point. Rachel, who had moved back to Columbus after her divorce 12 years earlier, was also home most days, running a small online business she had started during lockdown. They lived about 8 minutes apart. That proximity, which had always seemed like a blessing, it meant Rachel was close enough for Diana to meet for lunch, close enough to drop by without planning, turned out to be something else entirely. Diana noticed small things first. She would think back on them later, in the way you always replay the warning signs after you know the ending, and she would find herself gripping the arms of her chair with a quiet, devastating fury, not at them, initially, but at herself. For not seeing it sooner. For trusting too completely. For believing that the life she had built was immune to the kind of rot that hollowed out other people's marriages. She had always quietly believed, not arrogantly, but sincerely, that her marriage was different. That Marcus was different. That Rachel was different. That the three of them, together, represented something too real and too deep to be threatened by something as ordinary as desire. The first thing she noticed was Marcus's phone. He had always been casual with his phone. Left it on the kitchen counter, on the bathroom sink, on the coffee table during football games. Never thought twice about it. But sometime around late summer of 2021, that changed. The phone started going everywhere with him. To bed. To the bathroom. Into the garage when he went to grab something from his toolbox. Diana noticed, filed it away, and told herself she was being paranoid. She had always hated the idea of being the suspicious wife, the woman who snoops and doubts and chips away at a marriage with her own insecurity. So she pushed the thought aside. She made dinner. She watched television. She went to sleep next to her husband of 23 years and told herself everything was fine. But the thoughts kept coming. The second thing she noticed was Rachel. Now, Rachel had always been close with Marcus. They had known each other for over 2 decades, and in the way of many long-term friendships, there was a comfort between them. They could tease each other, argue about sports, sit in the same room and not feel the need to fill every silence. Diana had always loved that. She had always taken pride in the fact that her husband liked her best friend and her best friend liked her husband. She saw it as a sign that she had chosen well on both counts. But somewhere in the fall of 2021, the nature of that ease shifted, and Diana could feel it even though she could not name it. Rachel started texting Marcus directly, which was not entirely unusual, but it was becoming more frequent. They were jokes, mostly. Memes. Shared links to articles about whatever Marcus was interested in that week. Small things. The kind of small things that are impossible to object to without sounding irrational. Diana did not object. She noted. She watched. She told herself she was imagining it. She was not imagining it. The third thing she noticed was a change in Marcus himself. Not dramatic, not the kind of change you see in movies where the cheating spouse suddenly becomes cold and distant, and spends every night sleeping on the edge of the mattress. It was subtler than that. Marcus became, if anything, slightly warmer. More attentive. He started complimenting Diana more often.
My secret
her
recipe.
Cooking, the way she dressed, the things she said in conversation. He brought home flowers twice in 1 month, which had not happened in years. He suggested they book a trip together, just the two of them, somewhere warm. At the time, Diana felt a quiet, complicated gratitude for this. She thought perhaps they were simply entering one of those comfortable second wind phases that long marriages sometimes find, a rediscovery of each other, a turning back toward what had always been there. She reached for his hand more often. She laughed more easily. She let herself feel safe. Later, she would learn that this behavior has a name in the therapeutic community. It is called guilt compensation, the unconscious or deliberate act of a person who is being unfaithful to overcorrect their behavior with their spouse, to become more loving, more present, more attentive, as a way of managing their own internal dissonance. It is one of the most insidious patterns in cases of infidelity, because it is precisely the kind of behavior that causes a betrayed spouse to lower their guard at the very moment they should be raising it. And for Diana it worked. For a while, it worked completely. The moment everything changed arrived on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday morning in February of 2022. Marcus had gone out early. A breakfast meeting, he said, with a subcontractor from a project his firm was managing north of the city. He kissed Diana on the forehead before she was fully awake, told her to sleep in, and left. Diana lay in bed for a few minutes, then got up to make coffee. She walked into the kitchen, and there, on the counter next to the coffee maker, face up and fully illuminated with a new message, was Marcus's phone. He had forgotten it. In 23 years of marriage, Marcus had never once forgotten his phone. He was meticulous about it, the kind of person who patted his pockets 3 times before leaving a room. And yet, here it was. Diana stood in the kitchen for a long moment, the coffee maker gurgling beside her, and looked at the phone. She was not trying to snoop. She has said this many times, to many people, in the months and years that followed. She was not looking for anything. But the phone was there, face up, and the message preview was visible on the lock screen without needing a passcode, just a name, and the first line of a text. The name was Rachel. And the first line of the text, visible in that small rectangular preview window, made Diana's coffee go cold in her hands before she had even poured it. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she set the phone back down, exactly as she had found it, and stood very still for a very long time. She did not call Marcus. She did not call Rachel. She did not cry, not yet. What Diana did, in that first hour after reading that message, was something that would come to define the entire next chapter of her life. She thought. She planned. She made a decision that was as cold and deliberate as anything she had ever done, and she held it close, and she did not waver. Diana had spent 23 years being the warm one, the trusting one, the open one. For the next several months, she was going to be something else entirely. She started documenting everything the very next day. She bought a small notebook, the kind with a hard cover, the kind that locks, from a drugstore 2 towns over, paying with cash. She began writing down dates, times, small observations. The evenings Marcus came home later than expected, and the explanations that did not quite add up. The times Rachel canceled plans with Diana at the last minute, always with a reason that was vague enough to be unchallengeable. The pattern of text notifications on Marcus's phone, which she could see lighting up from across the room even when she could not read the content. She tracked it all. She did not confront. She did not react. She went to her book club on Thursday nights and laughed at the right moments. She attended a birthday party for one of Rachel's cousins, hugged Rachel at the door, and sat across from her at dinner making conversation about their children and their plans for the summer, and not one person at that table would have guessed what Diana was carrying inside her chest. She reached out to a divorce attorney in April. Not a lawyer in Columbus, a firm in a city 40 minutes south, where she was unlikely to run into anyone she knew. She paid the consultation fee in cash. She sat across from a woman named Patricia and she laid out everything she knew, and everything she suspected, and she asked Patricia what her options were. Patricia told her. Diana listened carefully, asked the right questions, and drove home in silence. She did not tell anyone she had gone. Not her sister. Not her closest coworker. Nobody. She understood, with a clarity that surprised even her, that the only advantage she had in this situation was the element of surprise, and she was not about to give it up. Through the spring and into the early summer of 2022, the evidence continued to accumulate. Diana found a charge on a shared credit card statement for a hotel in a town neither of them had mentioned visiting. She found, on a day Marcus left his laptop open while he showered, a deleted folder in his email that she was able to recover using a method her nephew had showed her years ago for finding old files. She did not read everything in that folder. She read enough. She photographed what she needed with her own phone, then closed the laptop exactly as it had been, and went downstairs to start dinner. She made his favorite that night, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the recipe his mother had taught her in the first year of their marriage. She set the table, and she called him down when it was ready, and she watched him eat, and she smiled when he said it was perfect, and she thought, carefully and precisely, not yet. What Diana did not know, and what would not come to light until much later, in the legal proceedings that followed, was that Rachel had her own set of calculations running in parallel. Rachel had gone through a difficult divorce in 2009 from a man named Gary, a divorce that left her financially strained and emotionally shattered in ways she had never fully recovered from. She had rebuilt, slowly and deliberately, over the years that followed, the online business, the apartment she was proud of, the social life she had reconstructed from scratch. But there were debts. Old ones she had never talked about, not even with Diana, who she had told nearly everything else. And as the affair with Marcus deepened through 2021 and into 2022, Rachel had begun, according to financial documents that would later be reviewed during the divorce proceedings, to move money. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Joint money that she and Marcus were managing together for what they told each other was their shared future. A fund they had been building, secretly, for the life they were planning together once Marcus left Diana. Except that Rachel, it would later emerge, had been moving some of that money into a separate account. An account in her name only. An account Marcus did not know existed. The man who believed he was orchestrating the situation was not, as it turned out, in control of nearly as much as he thought. By August of 2022, Diana was ready. She had, over the preceding 6 months, quietly transferred a portion of their joint savings into an account her attorney had advised her to open in her own name, all of it legal, all of it documented, all of it done with the guidance of Patricia, who by this point had become not just Diana's lawyer but, in a sense, her strategist. She had spoken with a financial advisor. She had consulted with a therapist, not to process her emotions, she was not ready for that yet, but to understand, clinically, what she was dealing with, and to make sure that nothing she was doing was being driven by impulsiveness. The therapist had asked her, at their third session, whether she was angry. Diana had looked at the ceiling for a long moment, and said quietly, that she was not angry. She was resolved. And that, said the therapist, was perhaps the most powerful state a person in her position could be in. Diana planned the dinner for a Saturday in September. She chose Saturday because both Marcus's parents and her own siblings would be available. She chose a Saturday because Rachel, who never missed a Saturday evening with the group they all shared, would have no reason to be suspicious of the invitation. She sent the text herself, warm and casual. We haven't all been together in ages. Let's do a big dinner at the house. I'll make everything. People responded with enthusiasm. Marcus, who Diana told nothing specific, assumed it was simply one of the gatherings she loved to organize. He offered to pick up the wine. She told him that would be wonderful. She kissed him on the cheek. She meant every word she did not say. On the morning of that Saturday, Diana woke up before dawn, went downstairs alone, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in the quiet of the house she had built and the life she was about to permanently alter, and she allowed herself, for the first time in months, to feel it. The grief, the rage, the particular, devastating sorrow of loving someone for 23 years and discovering that the image you held of them had been, at least in part, a fiction. She sat with all of it. She gave it its due, and then she stood up, rinsed her cup, and began to cook. Dinner was at 7 o'clock. By 6:45, the house was full. Marcus's parents, Bill and Sandra, sat on the couch in the living room with drinks. Diana's brother James had driven up from Cincinnati with his wife. 2 other couples, friends of Diana and Marcus who had been part of their social circle for 15 years, were gathered around the kitchen island, laughing about something that had happened at a neighborhood cookout the previous month. And Rachel arrived at 7 on the dot, as she always did, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the yellow dress she knew Diana loved on her. Diana greeted her at the door with a smile. She has said since that was the hardest moment of the entire evening, not the dinner itself, not what came after, but that single moment on the front porch, looking at the face of the woman who had been her best friend since the 8th grade, the woman who had held her hand at her mother's funeral and danced beside her at her wedding, and feeling nothing but a terrible, crystalline calm. They sat down to eat. Diana had made everything: roasted chicken, twice-baked potatoes, green beans with almonds, a salad, 2 kinds of bread. She poured wine. She asked Bill about his garden. She laughed at a joke James's wife told. She was, by every external measure, the perfect hostess in the life she had spent 23 years building. Marcus sat at the head of the table, relaxed, happy, unsuspecting. Rachel sat 3 seats down, across from Diana, and the two of them talked the way they always talked, easily, warmly, the way of two women who had known each other forever. And then, when the main course was finished and the plates were being cleared and the room had settled into that comfortable, candlelit ease that comes at the end of a good meal among people who care about each other, Diana stood up. She tapped her wine glass with a fork. People quieted. They smiled at her, expectant, assuming, most of them, that she was about to offer a toast. Marcus looked at her from the end of the table with an expression of fond, easy love. Rachel reached for her wine glass. And Diana began to speak. She did not raise her voice. She did not tremble. She spoke in the same warm, measured tone she had used all evening, and she thanked everyone for coming.
So much for coming
and she
tonight.
said that she wanted to share something with the people who mattered most to her, because she believed that the truth, however difficult, was always better delivered among people who love you. And then she reached under the table, where she had placed, before guests arrived, a manila folder. And she opened it. And she began to read. She read dates. She read times. She read the text of several messages she had photographed from Marcus's recovered email folder. She read the name of the hotel and the date of the charge on the credit card. She read a summary, calm and precise, of what she had documented over the preceding 6 months, and she did it in the voice of a woman who had decided, long ago, that she was going to walk out of this chapter of her life with her dignity completely intact. By the time she was 3 minutes into speaking, the room was absolutely silent. Marcus had gone the color of old chalk. Rachel had set her wine glass down so abruptly that it tipped, sending a wash of red across the white tablecloth, and nobody moved to clean it up. Bill and Sandra were looking at their son with expressions Diana had never seen on their faces before. Her brother James had pushed back his chair, as if he needed physical distance from what he was hearing. The two couples who had been laughing about the neighborhood cookout 40 minutes earlier sat absolutely still. Diana finished reading. She closed the folder. She set it down on the table in front of her. And then she picked up her fork, and she finished her dinner. What happened in the minutes and hours after that dinner table moment is the part of this story that people tend to focus on. The confrontations, the tears, the chaos of a room full of people processing a revelation that had just reordered everything they thought they knew. Marcus tried to speak several times and could not find coherent words. Rachel left the table without saying anything, walked to the front hallway, and stood there for a long moment as if she could not remember how to open the door. Bill, Marcus's father, who had been a quiet and steady presence at family gatherings for over 2 decades, stood up and walked to where his son was sitting and looked at him for a long, wordless moment before walking out of the room. Sandra followed him. Diana's brother James asked her, very quietly, if she was all right. She told him she was fine. She meant it. The guests began to leave, one by one, in the stunned, careful way of people who have just witnessed something they will be processing for a very long time. Rachel was the last to go. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and Diana has said that Rachel looked at her, just once, before she left, and that whatever was in that look, it was not anger, and it was not defiance. It was something closer to the recognition of a person who has just understood, fully and finally, the depth of what they have done. Then the door closed. And Diana was alone in her house, surrounded by the remnants of the dinner she had spent all day preparing, and the quiet was absolute. She did the dishes. She put away the leftover food. She wiped down the counters. And then she went upstairs, drew a bath, and lay in it for a very long time. The divorce proceedings began 3 weeks later. Diana filed first. By the time Marcus retained his own attorney, Diana and Patricia had already laid the groundwork for a settlement structure that reflected, in considerable detail, everything that Diana had documented over those 6 months. The hotel receipts, the email records, the financial transfers, all of it became part of the legal record. Marcus's attorney advised him, very early in the process, that contesting the terms as presented would likely result in a lengthier, more expensive, and more publicly damaging proceeding. Marcus accepted the terms. Diana received the house, the majority of the retirement accounts, and a settlement that her attorney described, afterward, as one of the most sufficiently structured she had seen in 20 years of family law practice. What emerged during the financial discovery portion of the proceedings, however, was the detail that stopped everyone in their tracks, including Diana, who had believed she had accounted for everything. Rachel had been moving money. During the affair, Rachel and Marcus had, according to documentation subpoenaed from both of their personal financial accounts, been quietly accumulating a shared fund, money that was, at least in theory, intended for the life they were building together. Marcus had been contributing to this fund under the assumption that it was equally accessible to both of them. But a forensic accountant hired by Diana's legal team discovered that a significant portion of those funds had been transferred, repeatedly and systematically, into a personal account registered solely in Rachel's name. An account that Marcus was not listed on. An account that Marcus, when confronted with the evidence, had no knowledge of. The man who had been orchestrating a secret double life, who had managed his deceptions with enough care and precision to keep them hidden for over a year, had been deceived himself. By the woman he had deceived his wife for. The one person he trusted inside the lie had been running a calculation of her own. Rachel, it turned out, had never fully committed to the future she and Marcus had been planning. She had been building a safety net. She had been protecting herself. And Marcus, who had spent months believing he was the one in control of the situation, had been the most deceived person in the room the entire time. When Marcus's attorney presented this evidence to him, Marcus reportedly sat in his lawyer's office for a long time without speaking. There is no record of what he said when he finally did speak. But people who were close to the situation have suggested that the discovery of Rachel's financial maneuvering hit Marcus in a way that the entire divorce process, until that point, had not. Because up until that moment, whatever else had happened, Marcus had believed that at least what he and Rachel had was real. That at least there had been something genuine at the center of all this wreckage. The financial records suggested otherwise. They suggested that at least part of what Rachel had offered Marcus was not love, or even genuine desire, but access to his stability, his resources, his usefulness. And that the moment she had what she needed, she had been prepared to move on independently. Marcus moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus in December of 2022. Rachel did not move in with him. She had, by then, already relocated to a city in a neighboring state. The relationship between them, whatever it had been, did not survive the disclosure of the financial records. Diana heard this from her attorney, who heard it from Marcus's attorney, in the careful, intermediary way that all information travels during a divorce process. She received the news in Patricia's office on a Wednesday afternoon, and she looked out the window at the street below for a moment, and then she nodded, and moved on to the next item on the agenda. In the months that followed, the social fallout was significant, and for Marcus, severe. The friends who had been at that dinner table had talked, as people do, as people always do, and the story had moved through their shared social circle with the speed and precision of something that people genuinely could not stop thinking about. Couples who had spent holidays with Marcus and Diana for a decade began, quietly, to disappear from Marcus's life. The youth basketball league he had coached for 11 years asked him, diplomatically, if he would be stepping back from his volunteer role for the coming season. Several of his professional relationships cooled noticeably. His parents, Bill and Sandra, maintained contact with him, but the texture of that contact shifted. Something had changed in the way they spoke to their son, something that Marcus would later describe to a mutual friend as a particular kind of sadness that was worse, in some ways, than outright anger. Rachel fared no better in the communities that had known her. Her online business, which relied considerably on a personal brand she had built over several years, took a hit when word of her involvement in the affair became known among people who had been customers and followers. Several long-standing friendships ended. Her family's reaction was, by most accounts, deeply painful to her. She had, in the space of a year, lost the social architecture that had taken her years to rebuild after her first divorce, and this time, the loss was one she had no one to blame but herself. Diana, meanwhile, was rebuilding. She had stayed in the house initially, partly for practical reasons, partly because she had decided that the house was hers and she had earned every room of it, and she was not going to let the events of the previous year take that from her as well. She repainted the bedroom. She rearranged the furniture in the living room. She made small, deliberate changes, not to erase the past, but to mark the beginning of something new. She rejoined a hiking group she had let lapse during the marriage. She visited her sister in Portland for 2 weeks in January. She began cooking for herself in ways she had always wanted to, adventurously, experimentally, without worrying about anyone else's preferences. She started sleeping with the window open, which Marcus had always hated. She saw a therapist regularly, starting in the spring of 2023, not Patricia, who was her attorney, but a different woman, one who specialized in betrayal trauma and relationship recovery. The process was not linear, and it was not easy. There were nights that were still very dark. There were moments when the grief of losing not just a husband but a best friend of 40 years broke over her in waves that she had not expected and could not have prepared for. She has spoken about this with people close to her, about the particular loneliness of a double betrayal, the way it takes two sources of comfort and turns them simultaneously into sources of pain, leaving you in a landscape that has been stripped of its most familiar landmarks. She has spoken about the strangeness of reaching, instinctively, in a moment of difficulty, for a phone to call the person who was always there, and then remembering, and then putting the phone back down. But she has also spoken about what came after that. And she has said, clearly and without performance, that what came after was not what she expected. What Diana did not anticipate, and what she has said surprised her more than anything else in this entire chapter of her life, was how much she liked the person she found on the other side of it. She had spent 23 years being someone's wife and someone's best friend. She had organized her days around the preferences and needs of the people she loved, had shaped her social life and her schedule and her sense of self in relation to others, as most of us do, as most of us are taught to do, as women of her generation were particularly raised to do. And when those relationships were removed, violently and suddenly, the expectation, hers and everyone else's, was that what would be left behind would be emptiness. Damage. A woman who had been reduced. What was left behind, instead, was something that Diana herself struggled to articulate at first, and then gradually found words for. It was, she said, something close to herself. A version of herself that had been waiting, quietly, for a very long time. She traveled more in the 18 months after the divorce than she had in the previous decade. She drove Route 66 alone in the spring of 2023, something she had wanted to do for 30 years and had never managed to prioritize. She started writing, not publicly, not yet, but privately in journals that she filled steadily and with a sense of purpose that surprised her. She reconnected with friends from before her marriage, women who had known her when she was younger, and who received her back into their lives with the uncomplicated warmth of people who simply loved her, no history attached. She found, gradually, that the landscape of her daily life, once it had been reconstructed by her own hands and no one else's, was a place she did not dread waking up in. She began, slowly and carefully, to trust again. Not blindly. Not in the way she had before. But with the particular quality of trust that belongs to a person who knows, now, that they can survive the worst version of things, and who chooses to trust anyway, not out of naivety, but out of a deliberate decision that the alternative is a smaller life than they are willing to live. Marcus continued to live in his apartment on the east side of Columbus. He took up running in the mornings, something he had never done before, and people who know him have said that he is a quieter man now than he used to be. Less certain of himself in rooms full of people. Less quick to offer opinions. He has not remarried. He has not, as far as anyone in their shared social circle is aware, begun a new relationship of any significance. He sees his adult daughter on holidays and some weekends, and those visits are, by all accounts, strained in the particular way that estrangement from a child who loves a parent but cannot fully forgive them tends to be. He has not, to anyone's knowledge, spoken publicly about any of this. He does not have much left to say that would help him. Rachel, as of the last available information, is living quietly in her new city. Her online business never fully recovered. She has kept a lower profile in every sense of the term, less visible on social media, less present in communities that once knew her, less willing, it seems, to be the version of herself that she was before all of this happened. Whether that is shame or grief or simply the practical adjustment of a person who has lost the social capital they once had, it is difficult to say from the outside. What is clear is that the life she was attempting to construct, the one she had maneuvered, financially and emotionally, to position herself for, did not materialize. The funds she had accumulated separately came to light during proceedings that were not limited to Diana's divorce case, and the consequences of that discovery extended into territory that will not be detailed here but that friends of both parties have described as sobering in the extreme. What is also clear is that Rachel has not spoken to Diana since the night she walked out of that front door. And Diana has said that she does not expect her to. And that she has, somehow, found a way to make her peace with that. Not because what Rachel did was forgivable in the ordinary sense of the word, but because the energy required to sustain unforgiveness is energy Diana has decided she would rather spend elsewhere. On the hiking trail. On the open road. On the pages of the journal she fills with a voice that is, for the first time in a very long time, entirely her own. There is a question at the center of this story that people tend to come back to, regardless of which character they find themselves most moved by. It is not the question of who was at fault. That is straightforward enough, and requires no extended deliberation. It is not the question of whether Diana made the right choices in how she handled the discovery. Reasonable people, watching from the outside, will land in different places on that, and that is as it should be. The question people keep returning to is a harder one. It is the question of how this was possible. How two people, one of whom was a husband of 23 years, one of whom was a best friend of nearly 40, were able to carry this secret in plain sight of a woman who was neither careless nor naive nor inattentive. How the ordinary architecture of a life can become the camouflage for something that is systematically dismantling it. And the answer, as uncomfortable as it is that proximity is not the same as knowledge. That familiarity is not the same as transparency. That we build our understanding of the people we love out of the evidence they present to us, and that the evidence people present to us is never the full picture, not because people are inherently dishonest, but because human beings are, in the final accounting, interior creatures. We carry worlds inside us that the people who sleep beside us, who know our coffee order and our childhood stories and our recurring nightmares, may never fully see. And most of the time that is fine. Most of the time that interiority is benign, even beautiful. It is the source of our creativity, our privacy, our individual selves. But occasionally it becomes the architecture of a betrayal. And occasionally the person standing closest to it is the last to know. Diana knew. Eventually. And what she did with that knowledge is the most human part of this entire story. Not the exposure at the dinner table, not the legal strategy, not the years of quiet documentation. The most human part is what came after. The decision, made slowly and without fanfare, to take what had been done to her and to refuse to let it be the last word on who she was. To take the wreckage and build something from it that was worth having. To wake up on an ordinary morning in a life that was entirely her own and to find, quietly, that it was enough. More than enough. Now we want to hear from you, because stories like Diana's do not exist in a vacuum. They speak to something most of us have felt at some point in our lives. The strange, disorienting experience of discovering that the world we thought we lived in was not quite the one we were actually living in. The question we want to leave you with today is this: would you have done what Diana did? Would you have stayed quiet, gathered your evidence, and chosen your moment? Or would the weight of it have been too much to carry alone? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one of them, and the conversations that happen there are worth every second. And if you are watching this story for the first time, welcome. If you have been here before, you already know that this is the kind of channel that does not look away from the complicated parts. We stay with the story until the very end because that is where the truth lives. Not in the dramatic middle, not in the dinner table confrontation or the courtroom, or the viral moment that people share online. The truth lives at the end, in the quiet aftermath, in the person who gets up the next morning and decides what to do with what is left. That is the part we will always show you. If you are not subscribed yet, please do that now. Hit the subscribe button so you are the first to know when our next video goes live, and trust us, you will not want to miss what is coming. We have another story in production right now that makes this one feel, in certain moments, almost ordinary. You are going to want to be here for it. Thank you for watching. And remember, the most dangerous assumption you can ever make about your life is that you already know everything worth knowing about the people in it.